or reform has shifted. How can you have an avowed Remainer making the case for an independent, proud, sovereign United Kingdom when he believes in the liberal global order? That should be a real warning sign to people looking at reform.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm James Heale, and today we're broadcasting from the Alliance of Responsible Citizens here at London at the Excel Centre. I'm joined today by the former Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib. Welcome, Ben. Tell me why you're here today, then.
Well, I'm here because Floss Knight, my campaign manager, suggested I should be here, is the honest answer. But it's wonderful to be here because, I don't know whether you feel this, James, but I think there's a kind of spring in the step of the colloquial right wing now. It's been so depressing being almost, not lone voices, but certainly whistling in the wind for the last 9 years, possibly, if not longer. Trying to make the case for a proud, independent, sovereign, prosperous United Kingdom standing on its own 2 feet, kicking the liberal global order into touch. But I think with President Trump's victory, with J.D. Vance's speech, which I think was a declaration by President Trump, frankly, of where his administration lies and what they think of Europe, I think those of us who voted for an independent United Kingdom in 2016 can be very proud of ourselves, and we can absolutely, we can prune our feathers and we can prance around in a way that we weren't able to before.
And you're promoting a new political initiative as well. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the new institution that I'm now chairing was set up by a lady called Claire Bullivant, who you probably know, who was, I think, Chief Executive of the Conservative Democratic Organisation for the reformation of the Conservative Party. And she approached me in November and said, look, I'm setting this thing up called the Great British Political Action Committee. Would you consider chairing it? And I asked her what it was, because it's obviously of American, you probably know more about this than I do, or than I did at the time. It takes its lead from American organizations of a similar nature, which are not political parties, they're not think tanks, but they combine money with the creation of political aims, ideology, policies, including finding candidates who can deliver those policies and even drafting legislation. And the way we're going to approach it in the United Kingdom for our GB PAC is to do all of that. But I think the precursor to any of the actual action points coming into being is shifting the center of gravity of acceptable political discourse to the colloquial right, by which I mean, an independent, proud, sovereign, democratic United Kingdom, anti the liberal global order against which J.D. Vance spoke so well in Munich. And, our center of gravity of political debate is quite over to the left. Our politicians, including particularly the leaders of the various centre-right, right-wing parties, are cowed by the, what is the acceptable, the established centre of gravity of acceptable discourse. They're cowed by it, and they try to tend towards that centre of gravity. So what we need to do is move that over by working with fearless thinkers, and we've got an advisory board that we're putting together, which include Lord Greenhalgh, Daniel Hannan, James Orr, if you know who I mean, David Rhodes, and others, who are great thinkers, intellectually at the forefront of our movement, and they speak fearlessly. And through their support and the way that they, sell the message, as it were, we hope to move the centre of gravity to the right. And then, having done that, people like Kemi, Nigel Farage, including Nigel Farage, by the way, who you may have noticed is slinking off to the left as he pursues power, they can feel comfortable actually saying what it is that they mean.
Well, there's a lot there I want to unpack, but first of all, on that point about Nigel Farage slinking to the left, do you think that's a noticeable tack over the past, 6 months or so? Yeah,
dramatic tack. I mean, it may not be obvious to the electorate, because these things, get obscured particularly in the case of Nigel, with his reputation, which is of a firebrand right-wing politician. But actually, if you look at what Nigel's been up to, he's done a number of interviews in which, for example, he said he's not worried about the rate of demographic change of the country. He's not in favour of mass deportation of illegal migrants. These are two things which the Trump administration were absolutely banging the drum about. He's taken on some dubious candidates, in my view. He put forward Charlie Mullins as a candidate for Reform UK. Charlie Mullins was an avowed Remainer, and perhaps he had a Damascene conversion, but he hadn't, because on the day that he revealed himself as a potential candidate for Reform UK, he said he would still join the EU,
yes,
given a chance. And that means he doesn't Charlie Mullins doesn't understand what it is he's standing for in reform, or reform has shifted. Probably a bit of both. How can you have an avowed Remainer making the case for an independent, proud, sovereign United Kingdom when he believes in the liberal global order? Are you with me? So that should be a real warning sign to people looking at reform.
And I also wonder about whether the wider debate has shifted. I mean, I do get the sense that in the Conservative Party, the mood has shifted slightly to the right on the ECHR, and also there's talk around migration as well. And so I wonder perhaps maybe about sort of, Farage going to the left, it may also be Farage is sort of not evolving with the times around him as well.
I don't think he is. You're absolutely right. I don't think he's really smelling where the direction of travel is going. And frankly, Kemi is to the further right. It was further right than Farage on the rate of demographic change, for example. She is worried. She made a declaration a couple of months ago saying that she was worried about it, and Farage isn't. So you've actually got Kemi on the right of Nigel, and you've got Robert Jenrick on the right of Nigel, because he's in favour of mass deportation. Nigel, by the way, is on the record saying that he wants a referendum on leaving the ECHR, whereas, again, Robert Jenrick has said he wants to just leave the ECHR. I can't understand why anyone in their right minds would ever want a referendum again, on anything. Let's just get elected on a coherent set of policies. Let's get a properly, as I say, colloquially right-wing government properly elected on a coherent set of policies with a coherent ideology, ideally with draft legislation ready to go in the way that Trump, hit the road with his 100 executive orders. Let's get them into office and let's do what this country needs. And this country needs a dramatic change. We're not talking about just moving the ship a couple of degrees to the right. This ship needs a massive direction.
And I'm fascinated as well because, the growth of PACs, and the closest British equivalent I can think of would be Labour Together, which of course was not tied to the Corbyn-era Labour Party, but was very much a sort of cell on the right of the Labour Party around Morgan McSweeney, which then obviously took over and helped run Keir Starmer's leadership campaign. This is alongside the death of the two-party system, which in the 1990s, as late as that, was still getting sort of 70% of the vote, but is now less than 50% of the vote. So in that space, do you think, therefore, there's a role of these PACs to come along and sort of fill the gap left by traditional mass movement parties? Frankly, I'm agnostic on which party governs the country, as long as it's got, in our view, the correct vision for the country and the correct policies and draft ideology and the competency to run the government. We haven't talked about competency, but that there is a real issue with competency. And I think one of the collateral effects of the liberal global order, which requires effectively free speech to be shut down for it to be able to have its way, as J.D. Vance so brilliantly set out. When you shut down free speech, you end up with parliamentarians and elected representatives actually who are pretty literally dumbed down. So we need candidates and people who are capable of thinking fearlessly, but competently, and have a vision and can actually execute. It's not just about talking, it's about getting into office and then executing. So will you be functioning more as a think tank then, or you won't be fielding your own candidates, will you?
No, we're not a think tank. We will be a pressure group. The idea is to unite the right, and to make sure the right stays honest and doesn't shift to the centre, and then unite them. And that unification is unlikely to come through pleading. It's likely to come through pressure, by making them aware that if they wish to win the election, they have to stay true to that coherent set of aims and policies and so on. And so that's our aim. And my message to Nigel and to Kemi is stop looking at the centre ground. The British people voted to leave the EU in 2016. They were first out of the traps before Trump was even elected for the first time. We totally understood in this country. We can pat ourselves on the back in this country and say, we got it. The British people got it. And then they voted repeatedly to leave the EU. You know, when they voted in 2017 for Theresa May, they were voting to leave the EU. Again, when they voted for the Brexit party in the Euro elections, they were saying, let's leave the EU. We were the biggest political party in the European Parliament. I don't know if you're aware of that.
2019.
2019, 29 MEPs. When they voted for Boris Johnson, it was a cry to leave the EU. Now let's get on and let's bloody do it, right?
And in terms of your past activities as well, what's your relationship been like since leaving Reform? And I understand you've had a bit of difficulty. Some local parties have asked that you to speak, and they've been blocked from having you as a guest speaker.
Yeah, so things, I was deputy leader of Reform UK, and there have been issues of an ideological nature between Nigel and myself, which go back to 2020. The fundamental one of which, by the way, is that he says Brexit's done and I say Brexit ain't done. You know, we haven't left the EU. We have left Northern Ireland behind. We've got an Irish Sea border. We've got the grappling hook of EU regulations still in our flesh. We need to throw that hook off. So there's some ideological differences between myself and Nigel, which would have posed a challenge to the relationship. But what really challenged the relationship is the fact that the party is owned by Nigel. And before I joined Reform, I had a long debate with Richard Tice, who was then leader, about Nigel giving up his shareholding. I couldn't justify joining a party which wasn't itself democratic. How do you make the case for the democracy of the United Kingdom if you don't have a democratic party? And after much debate with Richard, I settled on a letter of comfort from him because Nigel refused to give up his shares. And that letter contained various representations, including that we would fight for Brexit, fight for Northern Ireland, there'd be no deals with the Tories in any forthcoming general election, and that we would run the party in a consensual way, which was addressing the democratic deficit. And all of that worked swimmingly well when Nigel was doing his GB News thing in isolation on its own. But it all ceased to exist when Nigel came back, when he appointed himself leader on the 3rd of June. And I then started banging the drum for the democratisation of the party, saying Nigel's got to give up his shares. And various promises have now been made by Nigel and Zia Youssef, their new chairman, to give up the shareholding. But they haven't been delivered. And it's remarkable how slowly they're coming to the table to democratise. One would suggest they're rather reluctant to do it. And, that is really the crucial difference between Nigel and me.
I was at the September press conference where Nigel Farage was asked for his reaction on your departure from the party, and he quoted "The sun has got his hat on."
Yeah.
Hooray! What would be your response to that?
So my response to that is that if he's so delighted that I'm out of the party, I'm well out of the party.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no place for me in a party where he owns it. I could have remained in Reform if it was a bigger beast, if there was a genuine set of checks and balances on the leadership, a mechanism by which views other than his own could be accepted or at least entertained. But there isn't. That's the problem with that's one of the problems with one individual owning the party. So, for example, the other day, I don't know whether you watched, Reform came out with they did a press conference and they announced a windfall tax on
the energy. This is the energy
on renewable energy.
Yeah.
And whilst, of course, renewable energy is closely associated with the drive for net zero,
yes,
and whilst we may not entirely believe in renewable energy, I'm not sure, I don't think it can deliver the country's energy needs. I can make no case for taxing on a windfall basis, in other words, attacking a source of energy. We've already got electricity prices at some of the highest levels in the world. Why would we attack a source of energy? And it was a great example of bad thinking, and which couldn't happen if you had checks and balances on the leadership and a broader array of deep, capable minds debating the subject before the policy was announced.
Well, with your PAC, we look forward to seeing those deep thinking minds.
Thank you.
What's happening over the next 6 months? Just give us a quick overview of the...
So we're broadening our advisory team, our advisory board, and we've got people on it, as I've just mentioned, but we want to go bigger and broader, and we're talking to lots of people. There are lots of people who've accepted, and I won't give you a long list of names, but there are a lot of people who have accepted. Once we've got them on the website, once we've shown the world who we are by the people who are, associated with us, then we will be banging the drum to get money. We will also be looking westward across the Atlantic and looking at our cousins in Washington for their support. And we are completely ideologically aligned with the Trump administration. Everything that Trump did on his first day in office, everything J.D. Vance said in Munich, I completely agree with. And I hope that we can bring some of that pizzazz to British politics.
Westward look, the star is bright. Ben Habib, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.